Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and welcome back to The Stack, where we are working our way through this pile of physical media. And today we're going to be talking about Jess Franco's Count Dracula, starring Christopher Lee, Klaus Kinski, Herbert Lom, Soledad Miranda, Jack Taylor, and a host of other Spanish film standbys. Now, I was chastised recently, rightfully so, because during my Tombs of the Blind Dead episode, I said that if you wanted to know about Spanish horror, you needed to know about Amando de Osorio and Tombs of the Blind Dead and Paul Naschy. Well, I'd like to amend that and say that yes, Jess Franco is a Spanish filmmaker. He's a very important figure when it comes to discussing Euro horror. He directed close to 200 films. Some were pornography, some were horror. He did a lot. He covered a lot of ground. Some notable titles include Vampiros Lesbos, The Horrible Dr. Hitchcock, fun little slasher called Bloody Moon, Female Vampire, She Killed in Ecstasy, Venus in Furs. He did a lot of other films that didn't perhaps reach the same level of excellence. But in the late 60s, he had a working relationship with producer Harry Alan Towers. They had produced a series of Fu Manchu films starring Christopher Lee in an unfortunate bit of yellowface. But that relationship between Franco and Christopher Lee is what led to their doing this film, Count Dracula. Lee was very excited, having done a number of Dracula films with Hammer Studios. Of course, that was the role that made him a superstar, but he was always frustrated with the fact that Hammer never did what he considered a faithful adaptation of Stoker's novel. And suddenly, here was an opportunity to do that. One of the things he really pointed out was that in the novel, Dracula starts off as an older man. He's got a mustache, and as he feeds, he gets younger and younger throughout the film. And that was something he really wanted to see. That was the incarnation of Dracula that he really wanted to play. So here was an opportunity to do that. And he and Jess Franco and Harry Alan Towers teamed up to create this film, Count Dracula, which is, by and large, one of the most faithful tellings of Stoker's novel until we get to the BBC production from 1977 featuring Louis Jourdan, which is also far more faithful adaptation than 1992's Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. As I mentioned, the film stars Christopher Lee as the titular Count Dracula. It also stars Herbert Lom as our Professor Van Helsing, and Klaus Kinski playing Renfield, a very small role shot in one day. Basically all takes place inside the insane asylum. Typecasting? Maybe. It also stars Maria Rohm as Mina and Soledad Miranda as Lucy Westerna. Soledad Miranda, of course, would show up in several other Jess Franco films, such as Vampiros Lesbos, She Killed in Ecstasy, and Justine. Now, this film, while very faithful to Stoker's novel, is not necessarily faithful to Jess Franco. While there still are the requisite zooms and the stock cast of players, we don't see the same level of sex and violence that we had come to expect from a Jess Franco exploitation film. Franco was very much about having sexuality, nudity. As I said, he'd done adult films. Sexuality was very much a color that he liked to paint with. And this version of Count Dracula is almost devoid of that. As such, it doesn't feel as much like a Jess Franco film. Christopher Lee feels a little bit straitjacketed. That said, it's still a very handsome film. And for the Bram Stoker purists out there, it's a perfectly solid adaptation of the Stoker novel. Now, the film itself has a few issues. It's clearly a low-budget affair. And as such, it doesn't have the same kind of luster as like a Hammer film or even a Paul Naschy film. However, it definitely has its fans, and this new release from Severin Films, this 4K UHD release, is for those fans, to be sure. In addition to this great little slipcover with alternate artwork, it's got 4 discs, 4K UHD, and then we've got 2 discs full of extras. One of them has a 90-minute documentary on the making of the film, and we also have a soundtrack of the film. So it is jam-packed with goodness. The first disc has the UHD presentation, comes complete with a commentary by film historian David Del Val and Maria Rohm, who is delightful in her recounting of various tales. She was married to Harry Alan Towers, and so she has a lot of insider information from the producer side of things as well as on set. She has great memories of Christopher Lee, Herbert Lom, Klaus Kinski, Soledad Miranda. It's a very worthwhile commentary. On the second disc, there are interviews with Christopher Lee, Jess Franco, Jack Taylor, Fred Williams, who plays Jonathan Harker, and a great little featurette called Stakeholders by Christoph Gans, who directed Brotherhood of the Wolf. As I mentioned on that third disc, there's a 90-minute documentary made in 2017 called Dracula Barcelona, Barcelona being where the film was shot. Author Stephen Thrower, say that 10 times fast, author Stephen Thrower is also on hand for a couple of featurettes. And there's also that fourth disc featuring the soundtrack, featuring music by Bruno Nicolai, who people might recognize from a number of gialli that he's done. And if that wasn't enough Count Dracula for you, Severin has also released this double feature by Pere Portabella, featuring the quasi-documentary Cuadecuc Vampir and Umbracle. Now, Cuadecuc Vampir is a kind of quasi-documentary in that it features a lot of footage from Jess Franco's Count Dracula, shot in high-contrast black and white, even though the film was made in color. And it also includes some behind-the-scenes action where we see the actors getting dressed or waiting to go on camera or watching the cobwebs being put on. There's also a sequence with Christopher Lee reading from Stoker's Dracula from the actual text. And it's a very interesting experience, especially if you've just seen the film. It might also seem a little redundant. Now, what's fascinating about Portabella is that he was a producer working in Spain, but because of his political leanings and his objections to the current government, he had to work outside of normal circles. Cuadecuc Vampir is actually one of the first independent films to be produced in Spain, i.e. the money was raised independently outside of normal channels. Pere Portabella produced the Palme d'Or winner Viridiana, which is directed by Louis Buñuel. And Cuadecuc Vampir was shown at the Museum of Modern Art. Portabella was invited to attend, and when he was denied a passport, he sent a letter which actually called more attention to the political situation in Spain. So it's interesting that Portabella, who was this lauded, distinguished filmmaker, and Franco, who was kind of seen as this purveyor of filth and low-budget schlock, the fact that they were actually very close in spirit and that they were both protesting in their own way against the current regime. I think watching Cuadecuc Vampir immediately after Count Dracula is perhaps not the wisest way to go because it is so much of the same footage that you've just watched. You're just watching it silent without any dialogue. There is some pretty impressive soundscape stuff going on, but it's very much an avant-garde experimental film, and as such, it may not be as fulfilling an experience. I think watched on its own or separately, or if you're not familiar with Count Dracula, it might have a greater impact. What I find fascinating, though, is that here was this distinguished filmmaker, Pere Portabella, who I'd never heard of before, and probably would not have heard of if not for his association with Jess Franco and the fact that Severin Films decided to put out 2 of his films. So it is funny how being a horror fan can sometimes lead you into roads of respectability. So that's Count Dracula and Cuadecuc Vampir, both from Severin Films, both very much worth your time if you are fans of Spanish cinema. And heck, you might just learn something as well. Let us know your thoughts on Count Dracula, Jess Franco, Spanish horror, or anything else you have on your mind. Also, in the description of this video, you'll see 5 more titles. You let me know which one you'd like me take next off the stack. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.